Welcome, everyone, to the 30-minute Midas touch from beautiful Dyersburg, Tennessee at the Herb Welsh WrestlePlex. Now, here is pound for pound and inch for inch, the best of the best in professional wrestling today. A wrestling genius worth his weight in gold. The Golden Boy, Greg Anthony.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 30-minute Midas touch. I am your host, the Golden Boy, Greg Anthony. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Mysterious Mark Tipton.
Mysterious Mark Tipton. I do like that one. I appreciate it. Kind of an air of mystery. I like that idea of having an air of mystery about you. And it is entirely appropriate as a kind of a nickname for this week's edition of the 30-minute Midas Touch podcast, because we're going to be discussing a subject, one of the things that's changed over the last year and a half is we've become somewhat accustomed to seeing people wear masks. Now, that's relatively new for our society. However, it is not at all new for the world of professional wrestling. And so the subject of this week's podcast is we want to talk about masked wrestlers.
Yeah, and, and this is something that's changed over both of our lifetimes. But, nowadays when people talk about masked wrestlers, they automatically think luchador or Japan, right? But, America itself has a rich history in having, those territory masked wrestlers. My favorite masked wrestler of all time, bar none, is the Masked Superstar.
Okay. So,
and for me, it was because... I don't know if you remember there was a television show in the 80s that the NWA was a part of, and it was called Learning the Ropes. Did you ever hear about that?
I don't recall that.
It was a situational comedy kind of thing, but it was about what's his name, Lyle Azzuto.
Oh, Lyle Azzuto, former Raider
turned actor.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah,
so the show starred him, and the whole premise was he was a principal or a teacher during the day, and then he was a professional wrestler at night, and his family didn't know, and they found out, and then it was them all dealing with that. It didn't last very long, obviously.
All right.
But it had maybe, I don't know, 6-8 episodes, something like that.
Sure.
But his name on there was the Masked Superstar.
All right.
And then as I progressed in my research of professional wrestling, I found there was an actual Masked Superstar from the 70s and 80s that was Demolition Axe, Bill Eadie as the Masked Superstar. And Bill Eadie as the Masked Superstar was widely considered one of the best workers in the country under the mask. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
mask or no mask, he was still considered one of the best. And that's kind of where, things kind of differ nowadays is for some reason people think a mask gimmick can't be a main event thing. You know what I mean? Like they really, he'll never be the main event because he's this or that, But like that used to be a norm. Like you had a bunch of guys like that were on top. The Spoiler, for instance.
Certainly.
You know what I mean? Several other guys.
Well, your kind of discussion of the viewpoint that people or our society in general has towards is very interesting, because I will admit, when the subject was first mentioned, the first thing that came to my mind was Rey Mysterio. When you say masked wrestler, the first thing I think of is Rey Mysterio.
Yeah, I think that's something we've been conditioned to over the last 20, 30 years, that Americans don't wear masks. Lucha Libre does. And it is a huge thing, obviously, in their presentation of professional wrestling. And Rey Mysterio is a prime example of, I believe Rey Mysterio is the greatest luchador of all time just because of his international appeal. Like Mil Mascaras and guys like that, of course, they had runs in the States and stuff like that, but it was never like a big run. They were always like a featured thing and never really the main whatever, right? But Rey was been main event of several pay-per-views and several cards and things like that.
And he's internationally famous and accepted. And really, it feels to me like that mask is, iconic, for lack of a better word, and internationally recognized. And it kind of, I don't know how you feel about this, but having the mask kind of makes it where people from all over the world make it easier to kind of identify with him. He is an underdog that you need the audience to identify with. and perhaps kind of, the mask may aid in that because we've got something that we can all latch on to.
Yeah, and like I said, in Lucha Libre and in Japan and stuff like that, like one thing is we've talked about is like no one else could be the Undertaker. You understand?
Right.
Like that, as great as the gimmick is,
Right.
right? There's no one we couldn't present a new Undertaker next year and have him be accepted. It wouldn't have. It would.
No.
It would be completely a disaster, right?
No.
But in Japan and in Mexico, people regularly transition gimmicks. Like
right. You can have someone take over the
mantle of whatever.
Right.
Rey Mysterio, for instance, his uncle was the original Rey Mysterio. That's why he was Rey Mysterio Jr. But when he first started out, he was actually El Calibre, which was the hummingbird.
Oh, okay.
And his uncle let him work like that, but when he earned his right, when he earned his stripes, then he let him be Rey Mysterio.
Okay.
And that's I always I appreciate more things like that. And then another thing with Rey Mysterio is he actually changed his uncle's mask. Like his uncle's mask was obviously like it is his is, but like instead of the original mask had a crown on the forehead, right?
Right.
And then Rey Mysterio changed it to a cross because he said the actual king is God, is Jesus.
All right.
He ended up going with a cross. So just little things that he's changed over the years. But like we talked about, like there's Tiger Mask.
Yes.
One of my favorite mask gimmicks of all time as well. And the things that the Tiger Mask won, I can't ever say his name right. Sorrento Samamo or whatever the.
Yeah, Tiger Mask 1.
Tiger Mask 1. He still does things to this day that are completely mind-blowing. You know what I mean? Like, I'll watch highlight videos of him or matches, and he just does stuff that's, like, out of this world still. But there's been several incarnations of Tiger Mask. I think there's been 4 or 5,
Right. And I guess I want to get to, before we move on into individuals, and which is something I'd like to do, just kind of make sure everyone understands some of the successes that people have had who wrestled as masked wrestlers. One of the things that's where the American kind of falling out with masked wrestlers, or not unpopularity, so to speak, in modern times, I think might be an effect of television. We've seen, for instance, my favorite example is grew up a Spider-Man fan. Yet every time they produce a movie with Spider-Man, I am constantly frustrated because they want to take his mask off every 2 seconds to show the actor's face. And it's something I've seen, with Rey Mysterio. We saw in WCW, they had a series of events where he ended up losing his mask for a short time period. Now, I have done my best to wipe that from my memory because I despised it so much.
Right.
But it is part of an American mindset that they want to get the face out there for television purposes. Is that fair?
Yeah, and like I said, I don't agree with that. Like, to me, like there's things that translate to professional wrestling. There's things that don't. There's nothing wrong with having someone, a masked wrestler. Like Dick Beyer was the Destroyer, right?
Yes.
And he was a main event guy everywhere he went. California, Japan, everywhere. He was legit. And I actually got to spend some time with him in Las Vegas with the Cauliflower Alley stuff. And if he was in the restaurant hanging out with the guys, then he was out of his mask. But if he was at the banquet or at any kind of function to do with the Cauliflower Alley Club, he was in his mask.
Well, yes, because that's really what got him there.
Yeah, and he he was still trying to kayfabe. He was still trying to protect his identity to that. Another great story from CAC is that I may be one of the few people in the history of professional wrestling that's actually seen Jushin Liger without his mask.
Oh.
We had Jushin Liger in Vegas to wrestle one for the junior heavyweight title, the world junior heavyweight title, and we picked him up at his hotel and things like that. And he's very a very unassuming kind of guy, but obviously one of the greatest junior heavyweights, if not the greatest junior heavyweight of all time.
All right, I do like that. Yes, and I do like you for mentioning Liger's name. He's one of those that I consider Japan has a number of them. I would, throw in Hayabusa and some other people.
Yeah,
That weren't.
Hayabusa, and it's such a sad story, but like he, obviously he went for the Asai moonsault in the ring,
Yes.
and it didn't go right, and he broke his neck and was
Yes.
paralyzed and things like that. One of the biggest problems I had with that was obviously we talk about high risk stuff, and that's
Mm-hmm.
obviously a teaching point for a lot of guys now is
Right.
hey, this stuff can end your career,
Sure.
So, and the problem with Hayabusa thing was though that apparently the company that he was working for basically just gave his gimmick to someone else under a different name, but allowed them to still do a lot of his same moves too, just because they want to capitalize
Off the popularity.
of the gimmick that he had that he had done, and then eventually he got better physically, a little bit better. I think he was able to walk unassisted at some point, but like he still passed away due partly to the fact of the injury.
Certainly.
What I mean? I think he ended up having some kind of internal thing that was going on, and his body just couldn't take it.
Certainly.
So that was a huge thing, and like, but Japan's full of stuff like that. Even we talk about Tiger Mask, but we can't talk about Tiger Mask without talking about his number one arch rival, which was Black Tiger.
Okay. Certainly. I have to admit, not someone I'm terribly familiar with myself. I'm failing the quiz here.
So
but
Black Tiger usually was a Mexican or a luchador.
Okay.
In the Japan, but they would usually like Eddie Guerrero was Black Tiger.
Oh, all right.
Rocky Romero was Black Tiger.
Sure.
Guys like that. So, but they were always the counterbalance to Tiger Mask. Tiger Mask was your white meat baby face, and this was the heel version. The Bizarro, the Bizarro Superman.
Yeah, the outsider coming in.
So,
okay. Very good. Were there any other in particular? Now, we did some Japan. Was there, we do want to give some credit to the luchadors there. Were there any luchadors in particular? Because, there were several famous ones. I was thinking about, you mentioned Mil Mascaras. He was one of the first ones that came to mind. I knew him well. And then, of course, during the kind of the 83 weeks of WCW, there was an hour that featured many masked wrestlers. They featured the cruiserweights. We had the Juventud Guerreras, La Parcas, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a tremendous history within the lucha ranks. And in particular, one of the things that struck me is how they made the mask such an integral part of the storytelling often.
Yeah.
They would have instances where losing your mask and putting your mask on the line was a tremendous point of promotion to try to draw people in to see, is this guy going to lose his mask and how much it means to them. And
yeah, that was their blow off match. Like if you look at the United States, our blow off thing was the cage.
Yes,
obviously. But like in Mexico, yeah, it was the mask match, like mask versus hair or mask versus mask, right? Because those were like, especially mask versus mask, that was someone's career is going to end.
Yes,
pretty much tonight, or it's gonna take a drastic turn, either way. So, but yeah, as far as luchadors go, Blue Demon and El Santo are probably the two largest names there is in the history of lucha libre, and the fact that they were able to transcend the sport. They were in movies. They were in Conan, that's another one. He was masked in the beginning, but he eventually got unmasked. But he was famous on Telemundo. The Spanish soap operas.
Right.
So I mean that was a big deal. So I mean, but yeah, El Santo and Blue Demon basically were like having two rocks. Back then. You know what I mean? Like in Mexico.
Absolutely. And I like you mentioned that because that was the way it had been explained to me is that they were seen as, I guess you could say, folk heroes in a manner of speaking, because they were television stars or whatever, movies, etc., and well known outside of just being performing in the ring.
Right, absolutely. Well, another thing we need to cover too is the long history of people who lose, like a loser leave town or something like that. They're gonna disappear for a little bit, but then all of a sudden they come back
and
in a
then
mask.
somehow.
Yeah, they come. So to me, the most famous example.
I think you're reading my mind, but
the most famous example of this has got to be the Midnight Rider, right?
Yes.
Because to me, I think, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I really think that was the first national company that did that.
Yes.
So, Dusty Rhodes, I can't remember exactly the scenario. Dusty Rhodes had lost like a loser leave town or something like that,
yes,
right?
And
Crockett.
Right. And I have to admit, over time, I don't even remember exactly who it was he lost to.
Yeah.
I will tell you what is, and you can tell me if this sticks out to you, what is actually most memorable to me about the Midnight Rider was the television vignette they did, where Dusty Rhodes goes and sits down around a campfire with the Midnight Rider,
right,
and tells him, "Hey, this happened. I need you to go and kind of avenge me."
Right.
And it was really good television, and it was keeping up the idea of what was going on, and I don't know why, but that scene just sticks in my mind because I just thought it was so creative way to say, no, this is a whole different person. This is not Dusty Rhodes under a mask.
It's such a classic wrestling thing to do.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? And I don't know what the first example of that is, but like before that, there was the, Stagger Lee, with JYD and Mid-South.
Mm-hmm.
Same gimmick. He lost a lose-lose town.
Yes.
Everyone thought he was gone. Then all of a sudden, Stagger Lee comes back.
Ah.
And he does a lot of the same moves. Almost identical. And then we had a Stagger Lee of our own in Memphis. As Coco Beware. So
yes, he did.
I got into an argument one time with a guy. I said Stagger Lee. I said something about Coco Beware being Stagger Lee. He's like, oh, no. JYD was Stagger Lee. I said, well, it really just depends on your geographical location because I learned about Coco as Stagger Lee before I learned about.
That's true. Both were true.
Both were true. Very true.
And I appreciated both, and it did just make. Now, I guess one thing to be fair, but if there are somewhat younger members of the audience, not kids, but actually, Hulk Hogan did this in the WWE for those that remember. There was the Mr. America, and we had that.
Mm-hmm. Same thing. He was Loser Leave Town, I believe,
right?
Or Loser Leave WWE or whatever it was, but came back as Mr. And this is the thing too. Like, I didn't even see it coming. You know what I mean? Like he left. And I was like, oh, he's taking some time off. He must have
something like that.
He must have knee surgery or something like that. And then all of a sudden, like they kept promoting this Mr. America, and I was like, oh, cool. We'll see who this is. And then all of a sudden, so they bought me on that one. Like I didn't even put any more thought process.
Well, I'll be honest with you. Of all the people that I thought might ever do such a thing as come back under mask, Hulk Hogan is not a person I would think would be a candidate to do that at all.
And his mask was so ridiculous. It was that wide open mouth.
Yeah.
So you knew exactly who it was. There was no mistaking it at all.
Well, as if anyone could pass for Hulk Hogan.
Right.
There's a select few people who could do that and pull it off, and that was part of the fun of it.
Yeah. And
it was pretty clear, and the audience went along with it, and ultimately that's what it is. It was a fun thing for everybody in this case.
Yeah, and there was earlier examples of the Yellow Dog, and Barry Windham did it in Florida, I believe, first. And then when they did in WCW, they did it with Brian Pillman in a feud with Barry Windham. You know what I mean? So, like, there's that also. One of my favorite ones, though, is actually, this one's kind of odd. Like, Matt, I used to buy the OVW VHS tapes. I'm dating myself, but
okay. I've got a few.
Yeah, and you buy them by the month, like June 2002, and whatever it was. So I bought several months of OVW TV, and like I'm watching this television, and like Matt Morgan's there. Remember Matt Morgan?
Sure.
Huge guy. Well, Matt Morgan's there, but he's in a mask. But they're still calling him Matt Morgan. Right?
Oh.
And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And then eventually, as I got later in the episodes, they recalled what had happened. They had said that Matt Morgan had went into a match and said that if he lost the match, then he would never show his face in OVW again. And then he lost, and he came back in the mask because he would
never show his face.
Never show his face. It was a loophole. to the loophole to the whole thing. So I mean, to me, that was one of the most ingenious ones, and I've actually stolen that one myself too. So.
Well, yeah, let's give him credit. That was good for. That was a good way to go about that. I will chip in for those of us who were grew up watching Memphis. I'll chip in the Dream Machine there. He as a young person, he was certainly someone I really enjoyed. He had a very unique, a very interesting character. He had a great way of talking. He liked to talk and rhyme in his promos, and he was pure entertainment to me.
Yeah, I mean, Dream Machine's another one. Like I was talking about, those territory style mask gimmicks that just they worked, and I think they work everywhere. It's just you have to have the right blueprint on how to do it. Two of the biggest ones are Mr. Wrestling 1 and 2.
Very good, thank you.
Tim Woods and Johnny Walker, I believe. And those two, both those guys were phenomenal. I think Tim Woods was some kind of like amateur standout and whatever it was. And then Johnny Walker, when he became Mr. Wrestling 2, he was an older gentleman, but when he put the mask on, he could go with anybody like that. Mr. Wrestling 2 had a run in Mid-South in the late 80s, against Magnum TA of all people. And he was going, and he was in his 50s when that stuff was going on. So if you go back and watch some of those matches,
right?
And the mask itself to me, added years to his career, because otherwise people would look at him and go, "Well, he's old,"
and they wouldn't. Yeah, they wouldn't.
They wouldn't get behind it, or he would just flounder or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But we put the mask on, we didn't know how old he was. He was very athletic. He looked athletic.
Okay, it made him kind of timeless.
Exactly, timeless. That's a good word.
In all honesty, now I know a face paint is not exactly the same thing, but I've heard people say the same thing for wrestlers who use face paint. It kind of masks the progression of time and allows them to extend things a little bit.
Yeah.
You could say that for Sting, as an example. But more in the mask area, were there any other? I guess we mentioned Japan and so forth. Was there any more in the American history of masked wrestlers that we need to make sure and give mention to that you had?
Yeah, I think probably one of the most successful masked wrestlers of the modern era would be the Patriot.
Oh yes.
Just a great gimmick. We all know that the U.S. type
red, white, and blue
thing always works. Like a lot of people say, well, it's an old trope and professional wrestling, it's passe, it doesn't work anymore, but it absolutely works. I just watched a video of WWF, and it was like World Tour, right? And they were in England, and Hacksaw Jim Duggan was wrestling like Honky Tonk Man or somebody, right? Mm-hmm. And he got the people in England to chant USA. Like how because it was such a part of his gimmick,
right? And it's identified with him, and you just go with it.
So, same thing with the Patriot. Like he was just, especially that I really liked that late '90s run he had in WWF.
Okay.
Where he was the lone white meat babyface pretty much when everyone else was trying to be edgy and all this kind of stuff. And he had that pretty good feud with Bret Hart and things like that. I mean, he just he just passed away, obviously.
Yes. And
so, but I have a Patriot shirt. I bought a Patriot shirt
well, all right.
not long ago because I was such a fan of him, because I just love that gimmick itself.
And and as I recall, did that start in the world class area? Or maybe it was after world class.
Yeah, it was global.
Global, okay.
Well, because he was in AWA first as the Trooper or something like that.
Okay.
And he didn't have a mask on. He was just he came out in the cap and the outfit, the cop outfit like that.
And then they found that mask that worked.
Yeah, I don't know whose idea the gimmick was. If it was global, it may have been Eddie Gilbert's. It may have been Eric Embry's. It may have been. There's a couple different people it could have been, but they had the Patriot, and then he feuded with the Dark Patriot, which was another, like we talked about with Black Tiger. That was his arch enemy to it.
All right, and then I suppose we should continue to try to give everybody credit, because there is a tremendous history of people who did these sorts of things. Did you have anybody else in mind that you wanted to give a little spotlight to here?
Yeah, there's a couple right here. Like, one we talk about the Midnight Rider, Yellow Dog, all that stuff like that. But also, let's not forget Bob Armstrong was the Bullet.
Yes.
And that started with the same kind of thing. Like, him lose or leave town, comes back in a mask, and he regularly, even when he got older, to like we talk about with Mr. Wrestling 2, to kind of mask his age, he would just wrestle as the Bullet. You know what I mean? Because it was synonymous in a lot of the southern areas.
Sure.
So they got the rub from, okay, Bob's going to be there, but it's the Bullet. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Then there's stuff like, his son, Brad Armstrong, was actually Bad Street.
Oh, that was him.
Yeah, Brad Armstrong was Bad Street with the Freebirds. And because you can't turn Brad Armstrong heel.
No.
Right? Not Brad Armstrong.
No.
But he was such an amazing worker. He was Bad
They wanted
Street.
to utilize his talent.
Yeah.
Certainly. And
Well, because they were working at the time, the Freebirds were working with the Wild Eyed Southern Boys, which was Tracy Smothers and Steve Armstrong.
Okay.
Right, so it made sense for Brad to be involved in that angle. You know what I mean?
All right. Well, I guess one of the things, and I think it's something you wanted to get to. We've talked about how in Lucha Libre, for example, that having the mask taken from you is a big thing. And it's something that's happened in America, too. There are people who had the mask for a time and lost it. I guess probably for me, the most famous one would be to go with Kane. That would be an example that everyone should be familiar with.
Yeah, and his was more of a necessity as far as the longevity of his career. I would personally loved if Kane never unmasked.
Also.
But I understand the reasoning behind it, and the run that he had after he unmasked was pretty good too. So I mean, we can't really fault him or say anything like that. But I mean, to me, like I said, I would have loved to seen Mask Kane for the rest of his time. But
yeah, well, maybe you feel. I don't know if you feel this way. I thought maybe they did it as part of the longevity. In particular in the WWE, they think things need to evolve a little bit over time. The Undertaker, for an example, went through many different phases where he changed his look and appearance and so forth. And so having him without the mask for a time period just kind of changed him up a little bit, changed his character.
Yeah, but with Kane stuff, though, they just everything they had built, they just kind of slowly chipped away at.
Right.
Like him being disfigured in the fire.
Right.
And then, of course, when he gets unmasked, well, it was all in his head, and he was actually just, it's like that doesn't.
It was a psychological scar.
Yeah, it was a psychological scar. Instead of
which was a stretch. Yes.
The better story is that he was burned in a fire, and that's why he's covered up, is because he's horribly disfigured.
Well, sure.
But like I said, Kane, one of the biggest tenures in wrestling history in WWE and stuff like that. But also, there's guys like Daniel Bryan as American Dragon.
Yes.
Blue Blazer, Owen Hart.
Yes.
Sami Zayn, El Generico.
Right.
I mean, like guys that started their careers under hoods pretty much.
Right.
And then eventually worked their way out of it.
Absolutely. And all tremendous workers that did a great job, and the mask was a good way. And I guess if I kind of on that line, here's a question I want to throw at you, as I know time's beginning to draw short, but do you think that, well, let me say, Vince McMahon often likes to say, the one that we make movies is a kind of quote he likes it. Do you think that in some cases that putting on a mask helps a performer portray his character better, get across, because professional wrestlers are not actors, and so perhaps doing this helps them kind of portray that and communicate that to the crowd better, what they're trying to get across, you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, like with my students here at Pro Wrestling Mid-South, I actually usually their first gimmick is under a mask, because I want them to one, not feel like they have to be themselves. They have to get out of that comfort zone of, I have to be something completely different. And then when you're wearing a mask, as far as the wrestling goes, you have to use so much more body language when you're in a mask, because you don't have your face to sell with. and your face is the number one thing to sell with, right? That's how
Right.
people see pain or whatever the case may be. They see that on your face. That's how you sell things. So if you take that away from somebody, then they have to sell other ways with their body and their body language and things like that. So it teaches them that way when they do take off the mask or they do come out of the mask, then they're going to be that much better because they've already learned to tell that story without the face, and now they have the face. So
and those are maybe talents they would not have developed otherwise.
Exactly. And it's hard to develop those things after the fact.
All right. And very quickly, I guess I could chip in one more observation I had. I've thought often that sometimes as a member of the audience, having a person in a mask aids me in the way I react to them. If, for instance, if there's someone who's being the heel, it kind of, to me, it somewhat dehumanizes them to a degree, and it makes it easy for me to really, focus my anger towards that person and my dislike for them because there's something less than, less than a sympathetic human being that I see there.
Yeah, absolutely. And same thing with there's been all kinds of gimmicks too, where, like the handsome stranger, which wasn't really mask. It was like a Lone Ranger kind of mask.
Yeah.
Right, but it was supposed to be hiding. He was a handsome stranger. It was supposed to be hiding his identity. Then there was guys like we've always in wrestling we've always tried to capitalize on what was hot, and then Cowabunga was a wrestling Ninja Turtle. You know what I mean? Which
certainly.
But it wasn't, and that's the thing. If that happened today, AEW would try to put it over like he's an actual Ninja Turtle trying to wrestle. But no, they put it over like no, he's a professional wrestler. He's just in a Ninja Turtle outfit. And that's kind of how everyone put it together. But like, and that's the difference between then and now. But nevertheless, there was several games. I think Cowabunga too was actually Chris Champion, who was familiar in this area, and I actually think I can't remember the ref's name. Mark Curtis. Mark Curtis apparently was a great junior heavyweight worker back in his day.
Oh, really?
I've never been able to see any footage of that, so if anyone knows any footage of Mark Curtis wrestling, I want to see it because I heard he was really good. But apparently he did a Ninja Turtle gimmick at some point or, randomly, for people, I think. So. But anyway, we are just a little bit over time.
All right.
Not too bad. We're right on 32 minutes right here. So for myself, the Golden Boy Greg Anthony, and my co-host, Mysterious
619
Mark Tipton, thank you and goodbye.